Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, March 20th, 2024. An ex-business partner of Hunter Biden, Tony Bobulinski, tells the House Oversight Committee in the latest impeachment inquiry hearing that Hunter Biden lied about his father, President Joe Biden, not being involved in his businesses. House Speaker Mike Johnson gives a status report on the package of 6 fiscal year 2024 spending bills whose language is being finalized ahead of Friday's deadline to get it through Congress and into law, or there would be a partial government shutdown. President Joe Biden in Arizona announcing an agreement to give Intel up to $8.5 billion in funding and $11 billion in loans for computer chip factories in Arizona, Ohio, New Mexico, and Oregon. White House says it will create 30,000 jobs. The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell announces no change to interest rates, with concerns about still high inflation, but he signals that 3 rate cuts will likely occur this year. The Social Security Commissioner Martin O'Malley testifies before the Senate Aging Committee about changes to how his agency handles clawbacks of overpayments of benefits, especially when the error was not the fault of the beneficiary and was not discovered for years. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaks by video to U.S. Senate Republicans in their private luncheon, but not to Senate Democrats after the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer turned down the offer. And senators get a classified briefing from the FBI and other intelligence agencies on the House-passed bill that would force Chinese company ByteDance to sell the short video app TikTok or have that app banned for download in the United States. Deadline.com reports the 3 major news networks largely bypassed live coverage of the latest chapter in the House GOP-led inquiry of whether to impeach President Joe Biden. That in and of itself was a sign of just how much the effort has been losing steam, even among Republican lawmakers. The House Oversight hearing titled Influence Peddling Examining Joe Biden's Abuse of Public Office featured Tony Bobulinski, a former associate of Hunter Biden. Also testifying, albeit remotely, was Jason Galantis, another associate who is in an Alabama prison serving a sentence for securities fraud. Also testifying as a Democratic witness was Lev Parnas, a former associate of Rudy Giuliani. Parnas said that Giuliani, in advance of the 2020 presidential election, trafficked in false claims that the Bidens were involved in the Ukrainian corruption scheme and that the Russians were behind the disinformation effort. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News provided updates of the hearing, but scant live coverage of the proceeding itself. That was from Deadline.com. Here is a portion of that hearing. The chair, James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, questioning Tony Bobulinski and Jason Galantis.
During the 118th Congress, this committee has investigated Joe Biden's involvement in his family's influence peddling schemes around the world. So let's start with that. Mr. Bobulinski, was Joe Biden involved with any of your business dealings with Hunter Biden and James Biden? Was Joe Biden involved in his family's attempts to sell their access to him? You set out to form a legitimate business with the Bidens. Did you come to find out that the Biden family had no interest in doing real business?
I did.
Mr. Galantis, are you aware of any times Hunter Biden used Joe Biden, with Joe Biden's knowledge, to benefit their business associates?
Yes.
Which business associates?
Elena Baturina, Russian oligarch, testified about Russian, Chinese fund manager, Henry Zhao, and Nikolai Zlochevsky, a Ukrainian oligarch, oil and gas oligarch.
Okay. Now that we've established that Joe Biden was involved in his family's business dealings, I'd like to turn to the financial records we've subpoenaed. One major point my Democrat colleagues downplay is how much money the Bidens accumulated from foreign business ventures in such a short period of time. We have over $24 million to the Biden family and their business associates from 2014, while Joe Biden was vice president, to 2019. Mr. Bobulinski, there came a time when you were attempting to raise $10 million from the Chinese to pursue an actual business deal, a real business deal. But it wouldn't be correct to say this was a $10 million deal, would it? What did the Bidens conceive of the business with the Chinese becoming?
The Chinese were committing to deploying billions of dollars in infrastructure projects here in the United States as well as around the world.
Mr. Galantis, what was the financial goal you, Mr. Archer, and Hunter Biden set out to achieve? Was it millions of dollars or billions of dollars?
Billions of dollars.
Billions with a B.
Yes, billions.
Now I'd like to turn to some of the statements Joe Biden has made during his presidency about the findings of this investigation. Mr. Bobulinski, Joe Biden has said he never interacted with his family's business associates. Did he meet with you?
He did.
In fact, are you aware that Joe Biden also met with...
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. He did
yes,
multiple times.
Okay. Are you aware that Joe Biden also met with Rob Walker, Eric Sherwin, and Devin Archer, too?
I'm generally aware of it.
Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, chair of the Oversight and Accountability Committee, questioning the witness in the hearing room today in Washington, Tony Bobulinski, and remotely from a prison, witness Jason Galantis, two former business associates of Hunter Biden, son of President Joe Biden. You heard mention of Mr. Archer, another former business associate, Devin Archer, invited to testify today but declined, and Hunter Biden himself invited to testify and declined. More from the hearing, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, questioning Tony Bobulinski.
Mr. Bobulinski, I heard your opening statement. It's submitted to the record, part of our proceedings. I have a quick question. Simple. Is it your testimony today that you personally witnessed President Joe Biden commit a crime?
I believe the fact that he was sitting with me while I was putting together a business
Did you
deal,
witness the president commit a crime? Is it your testimony today?
Yes.
And what crime have you witnessed?
How much time do I have to go through it?
It is simple. You name the crime. Did you watch him steal something?
Corruption statutes, RICO and conspiracy.
What is it? What is the crime, sir? Specifically.
You asked me to answer the question. I answered the question.
No.
RICO, you're obviously not familiar with. Corruption
Excuse
statutes.
me, sir. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. RICO is not a crime. It is a category. What is the crime?
It's a category of crimes that you're then charged
You
under
have charges.
a long 100
You
list
have
of
charges.
statutes.
Sir, please
Want me to name the exact statute under RICO?
Yes.
Well, it's funny. In this committee room, everyone's not here. There's over 18
All right, sir. I reclaim my
lawyers
time.
that went to law school.
I reclaim my time.
You guys
okay,
to
thank
define
you,
the
sir. I
statute
reclaim my
under
time.
RICO.
Clearly, what we are seeing here today is a continuation of the 15-month saga of the Republican majority lost in the desert. Impeachment 101. The majority party, or whomever is raising impeachment, must accuse the president of a high crime, a specific high crime or misdemeanor. I would like to submit to the record HRES 918, the House resolution to open this impeachment inquiry.
Without objection to order.
This resolution does not outline a high crime or misdemeanor. It's not here. Now, when we compare the chairman's opening from his previous opening, he's talking about Ukraine and Burisma and all of this. This entire inquiry is based on a blockbuster piece of information that was in a classified SCIF room. And inside that room was a document alleging President Biden directly of a $10 million bribery scheme, a $10 million bribery scheme, extremely serious. What happened? What happened a month ago, Mr. Chairman? That document, the FBI arrested the person who offered those allegations for falsifying his testimony to the FBI. This entire impeachment inquiry is based on an actual, provable individual who has lied.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, questioning witness Tony Bobulinski, ex-business associate of Hunter Biden, at today's Oversight and Accountability Committee hearing. Associated Press writes that the House impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden is at a crossroads, lacking the political appetite from within the Republican ranks to go forward with an actual impeachment, but facing political pressure to deliver after months of work. The chair of the Oversight Committee, James Comer, pushed ahead at Wednesday's public hearing, claiming that the Democratic president was either complicit in his son Hunter Biden's business dealings, selling the Biden brand, or incompetent in the family finances, But Comer has also signaled an interest in taking the inquiry into another direction, stopping short of drawing up articles of impeachment against the president and eyeing potential criminal referrals of alleged Biden family wrongdoing to the Justice Department for possible prosecution. That from Associated Press. This is Washington Today. Speaker Mike Johnson, writes Politico, is trying to appease his right flank on the unfinalized spending package, using a weekly closed-door GOP meeting on Wednesday morning to champion Republican wins. In the meeting, Johnson highlighted a boost in detention beds for handling a migration surge at the southern border, billions of dollars in cuts to pandemic-era programs, longstanding anti-abortion rules, measures to limit diversity programs, and more. Democrats counter that Johnson is stretching the truth in some of those talking points, accusing him of distorting what's in the bill. That from Politico. Speaker Johnson spoke about this fiscal year 2024 spending package at a post-GOP conference meeting news conference as part of an answer to a question about aid to Ukraine.
Could you give us your updated view on the foreign aid situation and what your plans are?
Yeah, we've been very, very consistent, very adamant that we had to get our government funded. We had to get the appropriations process done. I'm delighted to tell you we're coming to the end of that, and we should have the bill text hopefully by this afternoon and begin to finish up that process. This is the second batch of bills. It includes the Department of Defense bill, as you know, Labor H, Ledge Branch, FSGG, SFOPS, and Homeland. That last piece, the Homeland piece, was the most difficult to negotiate because the two parties have a wide chasm between them, as you know. But I think the final product is something that we were able to achieve a lot of key provisions in and wins and to move in the direction that we want, even with our tiny, historically small majority. There was some very tough negotiation. But that having come to an end now, the attention, as I've said all along, will turn to the supplemental issues, and there's a number of avenues that we've been looking at to address that. And I'm not going to say today what that is, but just want you to know that work has been done deliberately along the way. But we had to get the approach done first, and having done that now, we'll turn our attention to it, and we won't delay on that.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference. He mentioned the Homeland Security Department, part of this six-bill package, and it was the toughest to get finalized. That includes language and funding for border security and immigration. Congressman Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, posting on X, the rule for the House Homeland Security Department appropriations bill required the president to sign H.R. 2 into law before we sent DHS funding to the Senate. But this week's swamp omnibus will fund DHS with no policy changes. The six-bill package is about 3/4 of the $1.66 trillion in discretionary government spending for the fiscal year that began on October 1st of last year and September 30th of this year. When the spending package comes to the floor, it's expected to be brought up under suspension of the rules procedures, which requires a 2/3 vote to pass, and expected to pass with a good number of Democrats voting yes, because several dozen Republicans are anticipated to be voting no. Washington Post reports the rules of the House require lawmakers to receive 72 hours notice before a bill is voted on. Speaker Johnson could move to suspend those rules, including the 72-hour wait, and put the funding bill on the House floor sooner. That could mean forcing a vote immediately after the text is ready. It could mean waiting a day or two. There is some appetite for that approach within the House GOP. That from the Washington Post. Some, though, are opposed. Here's Congressman Eric Burleson, Republican from Missouri, speaking to reporters.
Idea of possibility of waiving the 72-hour rule, do you think that's a problem?
You know, it's really sad that we've gotten to this point where, to me, it's a management issue. Why can't you organize in such a way that, we knew this deadline was coming for months, so it's disappointing that you can't manage to that. But if they're going to waive the rule. You know, this bill is going to be a bill that I'm not going to support. I'm probably going to be kicking and screaming about it. So regardless of whether they're violating the 72-hour rule or not, but it is something that we need to address going forward as a party if we're going to continue to do things like this.
And so you're not very optimistic about how the spending bill is going to go?
No, I think it's probably going to pass, but I will not be voting for it. I'm not going to be supporting something that is not going to look. My district wants us to defund the government if they're not going to shut down the border. They want us to defund a government that's spying on Americans and using the Department of Justice in a weaponized way against conservatives. And for me to continue to fund this government that's paying for transgender surgeries and paying for abortion travel is not in line with my district.
Congressman Eric Burleson, Republican from Missouri, member of the Freedom Caucus, talking to reporters this morning outside the closed-door House Republican members' meeting. House Democrats held their own caucus meeting this morning, and after some of their leaders held a news conference, Pete Aguilar of California is the House Democratic Caucus chair, and he talked about that spending package. The deadline to get it signed into law to avoid a partial government shutdown is Friday. He'll refer to it as a minibus, since it's 6 appropriations bills rolled into one, smaller than previous times when they rolled all 12 in, and they called it an omnibus.
With respect to the minibus, we look forward to, first of all, we heard from our leaders, Rosa DeLauro, and the ranking members of the committees of jurisdiction this morning at caucus. I think many of us are waiting to see the details and the text of these bills, but based on what we have heard from our leadership team and ranking member DeLauro, we look forward to putting up votes to pass this minibus. Most importantly, this continues to make important investments to lower costs that everyday Americans face. We staved off the thousands of poison pill riders that the House Republicans in the Appropriations Committee sought to put forward to attack women's reproductive freedom, to attack so many vital programs that the federal government undertakes, including diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are some of the key wins and priorities, as well as investments in child care, investments in our national defense. Those are things that the caucus is proud to support and has advocated. The fact that Republicans went from proposing cuts of 22% last year to where we are today speaks volumes to Leader Jeffries and Rosa DeLauro and their ability to work to find compromise and to fund government.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, the caucus chair at a news conference. And again, to summarize, the House Speaker Mike Johnson saying that the final text of the remaining 6 appropriations bills for fiscal year 2024 expected to be released before the end of the day, and 72 hours under House rules before it could come to the floor. That would put the vote into the weekend and pass the Friday deadline when current funding authorization expires, triggering a shutdown. So it's possible that 72-hour rule will be waived and it'll be on the House floor for a vote before then. But then it's over to the Senate. And TheHill.com has a story that Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, says he will hold up a $1 trillion minibus spending package that needs to pass by the end of the day Friday to avoid triggering a partial government shutdown. Paul told The Hill, "I will hold it up primarily because we're bankrupt, and it's a terrible idea to keep spending money at this rate." Asked if he would delay final Senate passage of the bill past the weekend, which would trigger the shutdown, Paul shrugged and lifted his palms to the air, signaling he hadn't decided yet how long to delay it. That from The Hill. Returning to Congressman Aguilar, he also spoke today about the election by acclamation in the House Democratic members' meeting of Congressman Joe Neguse of Colorado to succeed Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina, who's stepping down as Assistant Democratic Leader, and also of the news that Timothy Kildee, brother of Congressman Dan Kildee of Michigan, was shot and killed, allegedly by his adult son.
Special congratulations to Joe Neguse, who was elected by acclamation, the Assistant Democratic Leader of our caucus this morning. We also sent our heartfelt condolences to the Kildee family as they navigate a loss in their family. The caucus extended that to Representative Kildee, and we look forward to welcoming him back on his own timeline with open arms.
Congressman Pete Aguilar. Congressman Neguse posting, "I'm deeply humbled and grateful to my colleagues for electing me this morning to serve as Assistant Democratic Leader. Working together, I'm confident we'll continue to deliver real results for the American people as we continue to put #PeopleOverPolitics each and every day." And Congressman Dan Kildee posting about the shooting death of his brother. Our family is grieving and heartbroken. There are no words to describe the loss of a beloved brother and family member, especially in such a terrible tragedy. I thank the community for honoring my family's privacy during this very difficult time. Story from Associated Press. The Biden administration has reached an agreement to provide Intel with up to $8.5 billion in direct funding and $11 billion in loans for computer chip plants in 4 states, a cash infusion that the government says should help the U.S. boost its global share of advanced chip production from 0 to 20%. President Joe Biden talked about the investment today as he visited Intel's Ocotillo campus in Chandler, Arizona. AP writes it could be a decisive swing state in November's election.
I'm thrilled to announce the latest public-private partnership and one of the largest investments in semiconductors in the United States ever. A new landmark agreement under the CHIPS and Science Act between my administration and Intel for up to $8.5 billion. It's a smart investment. And that's being paired with over $100 billion from Intel, including $30 billion in Arizona and $30 billion in Ohio. It's among the largest private sector investments ever in the history of Ohio and Arizona. And this historic funding will be used to build new semiconductor fab facilities and modernize and expand existing ones in Arizona, Ohio, New Mexico, and Oregon. Combined, it will create nearly 20,000 construction jobs, many of which will be union jobs. And I made it real clear, everybody has the right to organize, man, to have their labor rights protected. But look, this announcement will also support 10,000 manufacturing jobs, 3,000 right here in Phoenix, with salaries averaging over $100,000 a year and don't all require college degrees. That's a change. For the first time in a long time, many of these facilities won't just manufacture regular semiconductors. They're going to once again begin to make the most sophisticated, advanced, and powerful leading-edge chips. Each chip has, it blows my mind, has trillions of tiny features. The width of a strand of human DNA, 40,000 times thinner than a single human hair. They require manufacturing precision, down to the size of a single atom. The process is enormous, requires enormous amounts of information, and with lightning speed they'll produce. And they're critical to emerging technologies. They're going to power the future economy, like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 6G communications. And to make everything faster, lighter, smaller, and more reliable.
President Biden at the Intel facility in Chandler, Arizona, about 25 miles from Phoenix. Story from E&E News. The U.S. House plans to take up 6 energy-related bills and resolutions for what Republican leaders are calling Energy Week, which includes attacking President Joe Biden's, quote, radical anti-energy agenda. Legislation on the agenda would repeal the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, make it easier to build energy projects in wetlands, and curb legal challenges from environmental groups. Republicans want to protect what they call American energy dominance, denounce Biden environmental policies, and oppose any potential tax on carbon emissions. That was from E&E News. The first bill on the House floor today dealt with prohibiting the president from declaring a moratorium on the use of hydraulic fracturing or fracking for oil and natural gas production unless authorized by Congress. And the first speaker was Pete Stauber, Republican from Minnesota.
Hydraulic fracturing has been around for almost 100 years. The practice, combined with recent technological improvements and the advent of horizontal drilling, has propelled the United States to global energy superpower status. This surge in supply has contributed to lower energy prices for consumers, stimulating economic growth and improving the quality of life for all Americans. In truth, a ban on hydraulic fracturing would cripple the American economy while surrendering world energy leadership to Russia, Iran, and China. Federal efforts to regulate fracking, which is currently adequately regulated by the states, could have an equally devastating impact. The 2005 Energy Policy Act clarified that Congress never intended the federal government to regulate fracking under the Safe Drinking Water Act. In the Obama administration, the Bureau of Land Management attempted to regulate the practice for federal lands and minerals, but the courts threw out that effort. In the decision, the judge clearly stated, quote, Congress has not delegated to the Department of Interior the authority to regulate hydraulic fracturing. The BLM's effort to do so through the fracking rule is in excess of statutory authority and contrary to law, end quote. Currently, states regulate fracking, and each has comprehensive laws and regulations to provide for safe operations, to protect drinking water sources, and to have trained personnel effectively regulating oil and gas exploration and production. In addition to preventing the president from implementing a unilateral fracking ban, this bill would also express a sense of Congress that states should maintain regulatory authority over fracking on state and private lands.
Congressman Pete Stauber, Republican from Minnesota, today on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 229 to 188, 15 Democrats joining all Republicans present in voting yes, sending it to the Senate. The White House is opposed to the bill. This is the first of a half dozen bills dealing with energy policy on the House floor this week. Story from Barron's. The Federal Reserve continued to take a steady line, opting to keep interest rates unchanged at the conclusion of this week's policy-setting meeting. The call, which was widely expected, keeps the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25% to 5.5%. The Federal Open Market Committee has kept rates steady since last September, in line with official strategy of holding rates higher for longer in an effort to bring inflation back to the bank's 2% target rate without causing an economic downturn. That reporting from Barron's. The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell held a news conference to announce the decision.
The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. The committee decided at today's meeting to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25% to 5.5%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. As labor market tightness has eased and progress on inflation has continued, the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals are coming into better balance. We believe that our policy rate is likely at its peak for this tightening cycle, and that, if the economy evolves broadly as expected, it will likely be appropriate to begin dialing back policy restraint at some point this year. The economic outlook is uncertain, however, and we remain highly attentive to inflation risks. We are prepared to maintain the current target range for the federal funds rate for longer, if appropriate. We know that reducing policy restraint too soon or too much could result in a reversal of the progress we have seen on inflation and ultimately require even tighter policy to get inflation back to 2%. At the same time, reducing policy restraint too late or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering any adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will carefully assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. The committee does not expect it will be appropriate to reduce the target range until it has gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably down toward 2%. Of course, we're committed to both sides of our dual mandate, and an unexpected weakening in the labor market could also warrant a policy response. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at his news conference at the Fed headquarters building in Washington, D.C. He said that the Fed expects 3 interest rate cuts this year. Wall Street reacting, the Dow up 401, NASDAQ up 202, and S&P up 46. The head of the Social Security Administration, Martin O'Malley, testified today before the Senate Aging Committee about new policies on clawbacks. That's when the agency reduces or stops monthly benefit checks to recoup overpayments to beneficiaries, money the agency sent and later, sometimes years later, claimed was sent by mistake. An investigation by KFF Health News and Cox Media Group found that more than 2 million people a year have gotten these repayment demands, and the total runs into the billions of dollars. Here's Senator Raphael Warnock, Democrat from Georgia, questioning Commissioner O'Malley about what's being done.
I think it's always important that we center the people as we discuss policy, remember the human face of the issues we talk about. A few years ago, Savannah resident Denise got a letter from the Social Security Administration informing her that she owed the agency $58,000 in overpayments through no fault of her own. She wasn't aware of it until she got the notice years later. She couldn't afford to pay that amount back, and the agency reduced her monthly benefits to the point where she can no longer afford her rent. That's the human cost, the human face of these policy issues and issues that need to be resolved. You said one of your priorities is to address overpayments, and I know you've addressed that to some degree in your opening statement. But as we think about the question, how does the agency plan to address this systemic issue? If you were to outline, say, the top 2 or 3 things that you think about that need to be done right now to begin to resolve this, what would those?
Yes, sir. This is one of the top. On January 2nd, I sent now hear this sort of welcome back after the New Year's holiday to the command staff, the senior executive service. I said, we're in a customer service crisis. Our top priorities are the 1-800 number, the time it takes for a disability determination, and thirdly, to address the injustice we do to real people who, through no fault of their own, find themselves in a position of having 100% of their benefits that they live on intercepted until they can make other overpayment arrangements. Before I had even been confirmed, there was an outstanding person assigned to untangle this problem and its impact, as you said, Senator, on real people, and her name is Leanne Striever. And she's done an outstanding job to help us do a deep dive and get our heads around what is the universe of people and what are the root causes and what can we do right now so that our obedience to the congressional mandate that we take actions to recover overpayments when there's been a mistake doesn't run contrary to the whole purpose of the act itself, which is to keep seniors from being, put under a bridge through no fault of their own. So the top things that we are doing is today I'm able to announce that we are no longer going to have that clawback cruelty of intercepting 100% of a payment if people do not respond to our notice to call us and work out other terms. The second thing we're going to do is shift the burden from asking the claimant to prove that they didn't contribute to it, instead to a neutral position. If we have reason that says that they were at fault, well, we should have to produce that reason, not them. And then the third thing that we're going to do is, actually 2 more. Third thing is that just as the VA, when they make mistakes, has a 60-month period to recoup that overpayment, we had been operating on 36 months. We're going to extend that to 60. And finally, we're going to make it easier for people who have received an overpayment to be able to file for a waiver and have that issue resolved.
Martin O'Malley is Commissioner of the Social Security Administration, testifying before the Senate Aging Committee. Questions coming from Senator Raphael Warnock, Democrat from Georgia. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, I'm Tammy, and joining me today is Paul as we celebrate 45 years of C-SPAN's unblinking eye on the democratic process.
That's right, Tammy. Since our founding in 1979, C-SPAN has been documenting history with a unique approach, unfiltered, without commentary, and entirely independent from government funding. C-SPAN is funded by fees from our cable and satellite distribution partners, and now with fewer people subscribing to cable and satellite, we're asking you to help support our next 45 years.
It's amazing to see how C-SPAN has adapted and grown. With the rise of digital platforms and social media, C-SPAN has expanded its reach, so no matter where you are, you have 24/7, 365 access to the democratic process.
And as we navigate this ever-changing media environment, C-SPAN's dedication to putting you in the rooms where politics is debated and policy is determined will not waver.
We ask you to support C-SPAN's vital mission. As we celebrate 45 years of service, your contribution helps us to continue to adapt and grow in this digital age. Visit cspan.org/donate to make your contribution today.
Here's to 45 more years of bringing democracy directly to you wherever you get your news. Thank you for your support. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make a difference.
Welcome back to Washington Today. It's available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free. Story from ABC News. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address Republican senators via a video conference at their conference lunch Wednesday, a move that comes days after Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called for Israel to hold a new election seen as a way to replace Netanyahu. The Senate Republican Conference Chair John Barrasso invited Netanyahu to address the conference's spokesperson said. Meeting comes in an election year as tensions on Capitol Hill and at the White House over Israel have mounted following what is seen as Schumer's calls to replace the prime minister and President Joe Biden's warning against Israel launching an invasion of the southern city of Rafah in Gaza. That from ABC News. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, gave a readout at the post-conference lunch news conference.
Prime Minister Netanyahu called me last week and indicated he wanted to have an opportunity to speak to all Senate Republicans. As I think you know, we just had that conversation. He made a presentation. We had questions and answers afterwards. I made it clear to him that it's not the business of the United States to be giving a Democratic ally advice about when to have an election or what kind of military campaign they may be conducting. We obviously have a lot in common, but it seems to me the bipartisan support for Israel seems to be cracking on the political left in this country. I still think our best policy is to not give any Democratic ally advice about when to have an election, who ought to run the government, or how to conduct a military campaign. Secondly, we also have in common concern about the best way to handle Iran, particularly given the fact that they are providing assistance to the terrorists in Gaza, the terrorists in Lebanon, the terrorists in Yemen, now shooting at us. This is a serious international situation. I hope also, as I think all of you know, that we can get assistance to Ukraine quickly.
Senator Mitch McConnell, the minority leader, Republican from Kentucky, speaking to reporters. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at his news conference was asked about the criticism of his floor speech last week, calling for new elections in Israel, and also his not accepting Prime Minister Netanyahu's request to speak today to the Senate Democrats' private lunch.
Leader McConnell said today on the floor that Democrats don't have an anti-Bibi problem, they have an anti-Israel problem. What do you say to him equating basically what you said about Netanyahu on the floor to foreign election interference?
Let me say this. I care deeply about Israel and its long-term future. When you make the issue partisan, you hurt the cause of helping Israel.
Leadership.
Yes.
Is it true that Prime Minister Netanyahu asked to address the Democratic caucus and you declined, and if so, why would you?
As I said, when you make these issues partisan, you hurt the cause of Israel. Yes.
But the specific accusation that you are interfering in a foreign election, you should not show any distance between the United States and a close ally at a time of war. That's what Republicans are saying.
Well, let me say this. I gave this speech out of a real love for Israel. And if you read the speech, we called only for there to be an election after the hostilities had declined, after Hamas was defeated.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer with reporters today in Washington. Some updates on the war between Israel and Hamas from the Washington Post. Prime Minister Netanyahu said he has already approved the Israeli military's operational plan for Rafah, and we are preparing to enter, he says, the southern Gaza city to attack Hamas battalions despite warnings from President Biden. In a video statement delivered in Hebrew on Wednesday to the citizens of Israel, Netanyahu said that preparations for the operation will take a little time and that he will also soon approve the plan to evacuate the civilian population from the battle zones. Also, this from the Washington Post, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to make a quick stop in Israel on Friday, according to the State Department, as the Biden administration pushes Israeli leaders to take a pinpoint approach to battling Hamas in the packed city of Rafah in southern Gaza to avoid what it warns could be a humanitarian catastrophe. Story from Axios. Senators wanting to crack down on TikTok are banking on U.S. intelligence and law enforcement officials scaring their colleagues into action on Wednesday. The House moved at breathtaking speed to pass a bill that requires the Chinese-owned ByteDance to divest from TikTok or face a ban. President Biden is willing to sign it, but momentum has slowed in the Senate. There were only 8 days between the bill's introduction and its overwhelming passage in the House. Senators on Wednesday will get a briefing on TikTok from the FBI, Justice Department, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That was from Axios. The leaders of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Chair Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, and Vice Chair Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, both of whom support requiring ByteDance to sell TikTok, spoke to reporters outside the classified briefing. Here is Senator Warner.
Senator, how soon do you about pushing for? Listen, we've had preliminary conversation. There's going to be, a much longer one. I wanted to get this briefing done first, so that, again, those of us who've been very active on this, we've got still some education to do to members and, frankly, to the public.
Senator, how soon do you think the Senate can or would move on any bill? Maybe the House.
Don't have the foggiest idea.
Really?
I don't have an idea at this point, but. They moved, obviously, very aggressively and quickly in the House. I'm not sure the Senate's got that same kind of timetable.
Senator Gainwell was talking about possibly doing some kind of a public hearing, maybe with the Intelligence Committee. Do you think that could be put together?
I think it's really, listen, this is a top priority for me and Senator Rubio. I think anything we can do to make clear to the public, and particularly those 170 million users who like TikTok, that this is not about trying to get rid of the creativity. This is not about trying to eliminate your ability to make money if you're a social influencer. It's about the ability to make sure that this creativity that's happening on this platform can't be manipulated by the Communist Party of China. And I've yet to hear even the most fervent TikTok advocate say, oh gosh, I've got to make sure the company stays controlled by China.
Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, Intelligence Committee Chair, speaking to reporters outside the classified briefing from the Biden administration intelligence agencies on TikTok. You heard a question about Senator Maria Cantwell, Democrat of Washington State, chair of the Commerce Committee, wanting to hold a markup of the bill, maybe a hearing first, making changes to it. The ranking Republican on that committee, Ted Cruz of Texas, also supports that idea, and he spoke to reporters.
Well, I just came from a classified briefing on TikTok and the threats that are posed, and the threats that are posed are significant. I have long been concerned about TikTok. I've expressed those concerns for many years. My concerns really follow two tracks. Number one, the risk of the Chinese Communist government using TikTok as a tool for surveillance and espionage of Americans. You've got roughly 170 million Americans who use TikTok, who are potentially being opened up to the Chinese government surveilling what they say, where they go, what occurs on their devices. That is a serious threat to the privacy and the security of Americans. Secondly, I'm concerned about the Chinese Communist government using TikTok as a tool to push propaganda, to push political messages that the CCP wants Americans to see. We've seen academic studies that show a stark differential between hashtags trending on TikTok versus other platforms like Instagram. So, for example, hashtags like Free Tibet or Tiananmen Square trend much, much more frequently on Instagram than they do on TikTok. The most stark was a hashtag about the Hong Kong protests, trended 175 times more on Instagram than it did on TikTok. There is no benign explanation for that. The only explanation for that is that the CCP is deliberately suppressing messages that it does not want Americans to hear. And you put that on top of the overall content that is on TikTok. You know, if you examine, TikTok has a very similar social media product that it makes available in China. And if you look at how China approaches its own kids, it limits the hours its kids can be on TikTok. And the content on TikTok in China is pushing things like math and science and education and hard work and discipline. And here in the United States, the Chinese Communist Party is pushing things to our kids like self-harm and suicide. They're studying math and science, and they're trying to get our kids to chew on Tide Pods. That is deeply concerning, so I'm glad the House of Representatives has acted. That bill is now over in the Senate. It has been referred to the Commerce Committee. I hope the Commerce Committee will take it up. I'm the ranking member on the Commerce Committee. I'd like to see us have a markup on that bill. Consider the bill on the merits and consider amendments. The precise language of this bill is still very much open to discussion. I think members on both sides may have amendments, may have suggestions for how to alter the language, but I'll tell you, we had a full hearing room in the classified briefing, and there was deep concern about the threat from TikTok on both sides of the aisle.
What do you see as the timeline for this bill, and do you feel like there's enough urgency in the Senate to get this done right now?
Look, I certainly hope so. That is a decision that is up to the chairman, so I cannot control when it is set for a markup. I have urged the chairman, let's set it for a markup expeditiously, because I think this is an important issue. I hope that we move quickly. All right, thank you, guys.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, speaking to reporters. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer was asked today about his plans for the TikTok bill that passed the House. He said he's still talking to Senate Democrats about how to proceed. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington, D.C. and across the country. Coming up Thursday morning, we'll look at Friday's government funding deadline and debates over border security with Texas Democratic Congressman Al Green. And Christopher Rugaber with the Associated Press talks about the Federal Reserve's inflation projections and the state of the U.S. economy. Then Republican South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman discusses government funding and U.S. aid to Israel and Ukraine. And later, the Washington Examiner's Ashley Oliver looks at the House Republicans' second impeachment inquiry hearing Wednesday and the status of the overall investigation. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Thursday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or online at cspan.org.